Welcome to the STR Data Lab.
Hello and welcome to the STR Data Lab. I'm Jamie Lane, Chief Economist at AirDNA, and I've got a really special guest here today, Bill Faeth, founder of Build Short Terminal Wealth, 30-year real estate investor. Real pleasure to have you here, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me in the Data Lab. I'm super excited.
So, Bill, I know you consume a lot of data. So I'm really excited to get you on here and sort of talk about sort of how you use data, how you have invested and sort of grown your portfolio in short-term rentals. But for those listening that maybe haven't heard you before, if there are anyone else that's sort of been hiding under a rock out there, but how did you get into the short-term rental space, and what does your portfolio of short-term rentals look like today?
Yeah, so I got into it in 2015 because I had an electrician that I played golf with at my country club when I was still playing golf. We both owned a 2-bedroom condo in a building in downtown Nashville. I was on the 4th floor, he was on the 7th floor. And we were playing golf one day and he's like, hey, we just started chatting and he had switched to short-term rentals. And he's like, I just did like $9,000 in a month where you're still charging, $2,900 for long-term renter, whatever the conversation was. It was quite a while, a decade ago. And I'm like, bullshit, that there's no way you're doing that like everybody else, right? Like all these long-term people, why would you take a risk of being into short-term rentals today? And we started chatting, and then, maybe, I don't know, 2-3 weeks later, we played golf again, and he told me about it again, and I said, well, prove it to me. Show me some numbers. So probably a month later, he showed me a spreadsheet, and I'd used him for projects. We played golf. I'd known him. I know he wasn't a BSer. And honestly, that was right when all the regulation was just getting hammered down. At the time, I still believe, according to you guys in Airbnb, Nashville was like the #1 market in the world at that time. But I had just come off the back of exiting a ground transportation company where I was battling Uber and Lyft in city council meetings over regulation every single week. And I saw how tumultuous it was here in Nashville. So I never invested. I ended up selling that and taking the profits to buy my first short-term rental down in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Technically Fort Morgan, Alabama. And that's kind of how I got into the space. There was also one of the early coaches in this business. My COO, Chris, and myself built his brand. His name's Richard Fertag, Short-Term Rental University. And I hosted and had his very first boot camp in my office in downtown Nashville. And that was kind of, those two combinations was why I moved into short-term rentals. And, kind of the rest is history. Now, you asked me what my portfolio looks like today. I guess if I take a step back, I bought my first duplex when I was 19. I had graduated high school in 91, went to UCLA in 92 on a full ride golf scholarship. I dropped out, made about just over $260,000 playing professional golf my first year. And my CPA and my best friend said, hey, you're either going to blow this money in Vegas, gambling and drinking and golfing because you're like 20, or give it to me, let me manage it, and let's buy a duplex. Long story short, Jamie, I held that duplex for 17 years, paid $209 for that duplex and sold it for $911, or just over somewhere like $908, $911, just over $900,000. So that was my first foray into real estate. Up until the house, the primary I live in today, I literally would live in a house for 2 years to avoid capital gains, and I would flip and I would upgrade and I would flip and I would upgrade. I've been in commercial. I built the first gold LEED certified building in downtown Nashville, 54,000 square foot building on 4.5 acres. I have a hotel that I have a partner in right now in New Orleans. But primarily, I think what people know me for are building super properties, right? And single family homes. And I still do that. I've got about $22 million in single family homes. I'm getting ready to close and sell a $3 million property in Montana next week. And then I'm going to redeploy that into a larger property even here in Nashville. So kind of my strategy, just to kind of set the table for what we're going to talk about, is the Pumpkin Plan. If anybody's ever read the book, The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz, I'm really good friends with Avery Carl, and she's like, I respect her and I love her tremendously, but I do not want the number of doors that her and Luke have. I don't want, yeah, I mean, she's got 8 short-term rentals, but 250 plus doors on long-term. I started going down that path when I was younger, and now that I'm 51 and kids and all that type of stuff, I just don't want that chaos and those headaches. So I've tried to really simplify my portfolio. And I think the thing that's fundamentally different about me, Jamie, than most investors in any form of real estate is I'm looking to sell as quickly as I can. So that Montana property I closed in July of 24, paid $2.95 million with $150,000 seller credit. So my basis is $2.8 million. I'm selling it on, it's either Thursday or Friday, the 18th, we're closing at $3.4 million. So I have a $600,000 gross equity build in 7.5 months. Makes no sense for me to hold on to that property because the cash flow is going to take me so long to be able to recoup that cash. So then I take the tax advantages and then redeploy that into a larger property here. So I follow the pumpkin plan. I have this thing called the 550-250 plan. I start with small properties and then I grow them, and 4 things: cash flow, appreciation, which most people really aren't doing research on appreciation in markets, debt pay down. I typically do 20-year amortizations, and if I do 30, I'm making multiple payments or putting profit back in to get my debt pay down. I'm also looking at amortization schedules from bank to bank, which almost nobody does. And then the last one is the tax benefits. So like this property I'm selling that I've owned for 7.5 months, I'm completing a cost seg right now. And like that blows people's minds. Why would you do a cost seg? You're gonna get all that recaptured, right? Well, there's 2 things. One, I am going to put the money into a 1031. I'll probably go under contract on the property that I'm going to purchase here tomorrow, if not later this afternoon, on a 45-day close. So I sync that up with my 45-day holding time. Only cost me $900 to hire my intermediary, right? The only caveat is, for people that don't understand how 1031s work, if I don't complete it, she has to hold the money for 45 days, right? By law or by regulation. Some intermediaries will require you to keep it with them for 6 months. So you need to know that in advance. So I am doing it. And then I am a firm believer, based on inside information I have from the former Senate whip, who I grew up with, that we will be back to 100% cost seg benefit this year. It's just a matter of what bill that's going to end up moving into. So I take my 60% of that 2.95, I buy something at 2.7 million, and with 100%, it's going to offset my $500,000 in depreciation that I had from the previous property, right? But then I've got to buy a second property to offset the $3.4 million sales price. So there's some complexity to that, but I think there's things on data. For me, it's not just about, using AirDNA to underwrite my properties and that type of stuff. It's also the data on the back end to keep my money from, I call it the Ryan Bakey tax perspective, right?
No, so much I want to dig in on what you just said. But I want to, there's the tax savings, there's a super property, but maybe for those who haven't heard you describe it, like what is a super property? And when you describe your portfolio, because and you share your properties, they're beautiful, they're amazing, and they're huge, or a lot of them are. What is a super property for those that haven't heard that term before?
My number one super property that I have in my portfolio right now is a 1-bedroom condo that is ski in, ski out in Whitefish, Montana. It's not the Smith Lake property that I'm doing my co-hosting retreat at, that we took from a 6.5 and turned it into a 12.9 by building out the basement and building bunk rooms, and it sleeps 38. And it's got all this massive stuff in it. It's not my Dragonfly property, which is the number 1 tier 2 performing property in Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, and Fort Morgan that's 6 bedrooms. It's a 1-bedroom condo. So the definition of a super property, and a lot of people get this confused when I started using that term 2 years ago. They think it's big. They use the word huge, right? Because they see these big properties that I have. But really what it is it is the top performing property that outperforms the entire marketplace. So I kind of use yours and other data sets at like the 90th percentile is typically about as high as you guys go, right? So I live in that 152% percentile. of return on investment, of revenue based on bedroom count and location. And I've got another place in Whitefish, Montana. It's a river property. And this is the thing for me as an investor. I use your data to mitigate my risk, but I don't use your data to forecast what I'm going to be able to do, because there's a lot of intangibles, excuse me, that the data doesn't display. So I bought my first river property. My first property there is called Lodge 93. It's on a river. It's about 15 minutes outside of Whitefish. And I pulled up AirDNA, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath cabin. And it said like 92 to 93,000 bucks. And I'm like, there's no way I'm spending $1 million, but there's no way with that view, that backyard, that location. So I went to Kenny and did the same thing and the same numbers. And I pulled up Rabu and Mashalizer and every single tool that's out there. And nobody said I could do over 100 grand. And I'm like, you guys are all fucking wrong. I promise you. And I spoke to Kenny, and I probably would have told you the exact same thing. I said, your shit is wrong. You can't hold me in this bubble. Long story short, I did 217 grand in the first year. And the thing that's really important that I think people have to look at when you're looking at data is I can take that 3-2 cabin and I'm not saying that any data set's wrong, but when the average host in that market and their average properties is average, right? And I have this view and there's a difference in my opinion between proximity and location, right? So the location's not incredible. It's 15 minutes outside of the traffic drivers in Whitefish and the lake, and 45 minutes to Glacier National Park, and 30-minute drive to get up to the mountain for skiing. But the proximity to my river, I'll give an example. I have a former mastermind member named Joe Jakes. He has a place in Hungry Horse, which is on the other side of Whitefish on the way to Glacier. And I'm sure you guys have had like Quorum and Hungry Horse in your top list in that area in the past. And he's right on a river. He can see it. The views are not quite as good as mine. He has a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, but he has no proximity to the river because it's elevated. It's like 30 feet up on the Flathead River. His guests can't paddleboard. They can't fish. They can't do all that type of stuff. Mine, I can stand on my back deck and throw my fly rod literally into the river while I'm cooking burgers, right? So that gives me more marketability, even though the data would show that those properties are the same. So what I've done is I've taken your data and I created what's called a super grader, a super property grader. And it's kind of like Avery Carl's enemy method, right? We take the AirDNA data and I grade the property I'm looking to purchase. Location, proximity, views, amenities, photo quality, marketability, all this 10-item checklist, and I grade as honestly as I can, because we all do get, when we're like, well, oh my God, we find that probably the place you're going next week, right? This is the coolest thing ever. I got to buy this. But as long as we can stay honest, we grade that property, then we take 10 other properties and we grade them. So there's 2 things that happen. We systematically use this data, right, to be able to grade them, but we're also learning the holes in the marketplace and what's missing and the requirements. So I don't talk BS about like the Smokies. The reason I don't invest there, if I go buy a 4, 5, 6, 7-bedroom, by default, I got to have $100,000 game room. So that's like ripping off C notes after I close, right? Or the property's underperforming and I got to make upgrades. I got to put a pool on the roof of that 1-bedroom condo, whatever it is. So I take your data and I'm looking for tertiary markets that nobody's investing into. That's why, Jamie, I went into Banner Elk, North Carolina, instead of the Smokies 3.5 years ago. That's why I started in Fort Morgan, Alabama in 2015 versus being in Destin where everybody else was. That's why I went to Whitefish, Montana, as opposed to Big Sky, Montana. It's why I'm at Smith Lake, which is down by Birmingham, Alabama, as opposed to Lake Martin, which is the biggest, most invested lake in that entire state. So I think that the data is super, super important to me, but I do believe that a lot of people use it backwards, to where instead of doing their research and creating some of their own data, they then going to Proforma and then doing like a good, better, best with their DNA data. I think they do that. I know they do. I see it every day. They run the data first and then they get mentally handcuffed. Oh my God, because they haven't done that other research. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. And we see all the time that people sort of start with the market they maybe want to travel to, that they grew up going to. They look at some for sale homes, see what those could earn, and essentially like, oh, it doesn't make sense to invest in short term rentals today because the properties maybe they think they want to invest in don't make sense for new investment. Where in reality, they need to start and looking at the markets that and could really support investment and then how to really make money in those markets, differentiate themselves. And it's so funny in doing these sort of lists. And I'm not sure if you've heard me say it, but like the report that we do that I hate the most is our best places to invest list. It's like, it's the most viewed thing on our website, but it's the report I hate to do because like no one should invest in the same market as someone else. Like there's so much that goes into coming into how and why you should invest. For me to be able to come up with the best places to invest list, like just doesn't make sense because it's
there should be pictures of you and me and Kenny Bedwell and John Bianchi in like the post office, the most wanted, because we ruin markets, right?
Yeah.
When AirDNA puts out, a top 10 list or a top 100 list, or Kenny does it, or John talks about a market, or I talk about a market, people flood into that with no qualms, right? And I've told people Whitefish as an example. Do not invest into Whitefish, Montana, if cash flow is your number one priority, right? Because you have to find the diamond in the rough from a cash flow perspective. Now, I believe it's still today one of the best. I just talked about national news yesterday about the appreciation that I've gotten in the Whitefish market. So it all depends on where you're at financially. But I think one of the things, what you just said, people love going someplace, I want to invest there. I just went to Aspen for the first time in my life about a month ago, and I loved skiing at Snowmass. I stayed at the Viceroy Hotel, and I'm walking into the village, and it's dead. And there's nobody there, right? And I'm like, why are people not here? And it literally was the last week of February, which was a perfect time for people to be there skiing. Not a great place to, spend $6 million for a 3-bedroom on a ski in, ski out, or 1.8 million for a 1-bedroom, village condo. There's much better places to go and do it. So for me, as I show you those primary markets, I only invest in places that I want to be in, that I like. But what I do is I find the tertiary market, and I find the market that becomes investable. As an example, my family and I have not been to Gulf Shores, Alabama for over 2 years. Even though I've got amazing properties down there, we vacation in 30A. So I make my money in Gulf Shores, and I'm a little bougie. They don't have great restaurants. They don't have great stuff down there. It's redneck Riviera, right, for where I live in the South. But we go to 30A, and I can take my big property, like my daughter, my wife and my youngest daughter are doing a girls' deal the first week of June, right? So that's an $18,000 week. And they're going to our house, and I hate to give that up. But I say, hey, don't you guys want to go to 38? I can get you a place for like 10 grand, and we can make we make $8,000 on that delta.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with every single market I'm looking into. And I'll tell you right now, for your listeners that are out there, my wife and I personally want a lifestyle asset on the east coast of Florida, south of Tampa, just from a weather standpoint. On the Emerald Coast, and that's not great in December, January, and February.
No.
Instead of buying something on Anna Maria Island or in Punta Gorda or Naples or Fort Myers, where everybody else goes, my hub from an investment standpoint is IMG in Bradenton. If I can have the proximity to the bridge to get to Anna Maria Island, if I can have the proximity to be able to get to the beaches, and I know the traffic that's coming in and out of IMG, and I can design my property to serve beach and the families and people that are coming to IMG, now I've created 2 traffic drivers as opposed to 1 just being the beach. So that's kind of this gem that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. I know you guys probably pick that up in your data, but the investors, the influencers, if you will, don't talk about how you can draw off of something like an IMG. So I'm always looking for multiple traffic sources in a market as opposed to just one.
Yeah, and you, Bill, you talk to a lot of investors, I'm sure, on a daily, weekly basis, and you've sort of seen this and continuum over and pre-COVID and during COVID, the sort of boom afterwards, and then where we're at today with and obviously home values have appreciated a ton over the past 5 years. We've got interest rates that are sitting at and still at sort of multi-decade highs. We've got incomes from short-term rentals that have definitely come down off of their highs of 2021, 2022. So when people sort of ask you, like, Bill, is today a good time to invest in short-term rentals? Generally, how do you respond?
The answer that nobody wants to hear. It depends. That's what your CPA or your attorney.
That's a great consultant answer.
That's what your CPA and attorney always tell you. It really depends. So, and it does. And here's why. And then I take the next step to go deeper. Let's talk about your financial situation and your risk tolerance and what you want. Why what I call the why before the why. Why are you buying this? And here's where I see most people making mistakes is they buy the lifestyle asset when they can't afford it. And kind of like I said with Gulf Shores and 30A, buy something, make a financially driven decision first, and then go pay for the vacation where you want to go vacation if it doesn't make sense in that spot, right? So I want to be in Big Sky. My wife and I went on 3 ski vacations this year. I own in Whitefish, but we went to Big Sky. I went to Deer Valley, and we went to Aspen, right? Because I can't invest in any of those markets and make money. I can make money in Whitefish. So then there's 4 pillars I look at when I'm making an investment. Number 1 for me, which may be a little bit different for other people, is cash flow. Number 2 is appreciation. So I eliminate COVID. I'm looking at 24, 23, 22, 19, and 18. If you don't know how to research that, just ask your agent. They can get it from NAR and tell you what it is. Now, don't do the entire market, right? Talk about data. Be specific. If you're buying a 4-bedroom that's $600,000, look at $500,000 to $900,000 or $800,000. Don't take the whole market, including $5 million properties. Like in Whitefish, as an example, the property that just appreciated 20%, I paid almost $3 million for, right? So that's not happening with $600 to $1 million properties right now. But it's the super wealthy that are moving into this market that are forcing that high-end appreciation up quicker. So then I'm looking at debt pay down and then the tax benefits. I'm looking at those 4 pillars to make an investment. So I do believe in my heart and from the data that I see that if you can find the right property, you can invest into any market. Jamie, we can go buy a place in Kissimmee, Florida today if we're patient and we find the right one at the right price that has something unique about it. So that's one thing for me. I'm not going and buying a 2-bedroom in Kissimmee, 2-bedroom condo. I don't care how much water park stuff they have outside, because the other 700 condos in the subdivision are going to have access to that as well. I'm finding something unique. And the number 1 property that I mentioned earlier, that river property in Montana, it took me 2 years, 6 months, and 8 days to find that property. I look every day. I am maniacal about being in the data tools on Zillow, talking to my agents every single day, because I find properties for other people. I'm looking for myself. But I very rarely put myself under the gun of a 1031, because that's when I think we make bad decisions as we get under the timing of pressure, right?
Yep.
So I think people have to understand, it's just like losing weight. It's just like going to the gym. We need to practice, right? We need to be running performas. We need to be researching markets. It's not just something to where we go into buying mode, and most people that are looking at like properties 0 to 5, they're not going to have the experience to truly be able to identify and underwrite an amazing deal unless they continue to practice before buying mode.
So if someone sort of bought in, they're like, all right, I love what Bill's saying. I want to try to create a super property of my own. What's sort of the biggest sort of mistake that you see people do? Is it picking the wrong market? Is it picking the wrong type of property, not being patient enough? Is it not designing and investing into that property once they get it? Because finding the market, finding the property is only one step to actually creating a cash flowing asset. So where do you see the biggest sort of misconceptions or like mistakes that people make when I'm sort of seeing it through to completion?
Can I give you 2 instead of 1?
Yeah.
Number 1 is people compromise on their properties. And it's what you said. It's the underwriting process on the front end. Number 2 and this is might blow some people's minds, is they're buying the property. I don't buy property. I buy land. I buy the outside. I buy what God built, because Jamie cannot come in and compete with my view that I have at that high-performing super property in Montana. That is an average 3-2 cabin. People are not booking that place because of the cabin. Even though we have nice furniture and we just added a $20,000, like John Dutton, Montana fireplace inside, and we redid the master bathroom and all that shit, they're buying what's outside. We got to buy what God built, right? And I'll give you a really quick example. For 3.5 years, I've had the number one tier 2 performing property in the entire Emerald Coast. I will proclaim that all. And I've looked at all your data. I've looked at everything from Port St. Joe to Fort Morgan, Alabama. 6-bedroom, 4-bath pool. And you know why that is? Because there were 4 open lots in front of me. 4 open lots. And it allowed me to market my property as almost beachfront, right?
Yeah.
And whereas every other place has the sliver view between the 5-bedroom and the 8-bedroom in front of them, I can market it as almost beachfront. Well, you know what's in front of me now that's almost completed? An 8-bedroom freaking monstrosity of a house that has ruined my view. And I'm probably going to go, I did $328,000 in revenue on this property in 2024, and I'm anticipating a $50,000 to $60,000 drop in revenue because now I have my competitive advantage eliminated.
No,
Does that make sense?
And I've got a great story on that. Do you know Ben Wolf?
I know who he is.
They were going to do their big hotel project with like the waterfalls and the hills of Texas, and they scrapped the entire project because they couldn't get the rights for the view of, like, there was this big property that they were going to be able to, essentially what could be seen from the hotel. They couldn't get contact with the owner. They couldn't control what was going to be happening. So they scrapped the entire project because the view was going to be so important to the returns that hotel made over long term.
100%. I'll tell you just a little quick story. If you remember when the polar vortex 2 Christmases ago took over the entire country, day one of that is when Bria, my wife, and I flew to Whitefish, Montana for the first time together to find that property, that river property. I walked in the house. The trees are snow-capped. The river's snow-capped. The lake, we can see all the way into Canada from this place, into the Rocky Mountains. And the view was so mesmerizing. I walked to the like A-frame style windows, and I just gazed out at that view for like 5.5 minutes. I walked back outside in my tennis shoes, and I'm like in my hoodie and my joggers, and I'm freezing at 6 degrees. And I walked down to the river, and I'm looking at everything outside. Next morning, we're flying to go look at Scottsdale, right? Like a 6 a.m. flight. And she's like, and she's kind of being a smart ass as we're on the flight. And she's like, so what did you think about the house? I said, it was nice. I said, but man, that view, the river, blah, blah, blah. She said, what do you think about the upstairs? She's like, you didn't even effing go upstairs. And I said, I don't care. We're not buying the house. We're buying everything else that's outside. So I think one of the other mistakes, Jamie, is like, even in that property, that river view, the access, all that, the location, that all sells itself. But I added a hot tub and I added a barrel sauna. So I did the only barrel sauna in the entire market. I spent like $9,000 to add a deck to make sure that it's strategically positioned to leverage the view, not only from the guest experience, but when I can get my photographer in there on the backside of the hot tub and show the hot tub in the photo and the charcuterie board and the glass of wine and the view, and then the glass door, you can get a shot inside the barrel sauna to show the view. And then that worked so well, I went back in last June and added a geodome on the other side of the house, just like a 15-footer hype dome, and put some outdoor furniture in it. And most importantly, a $250 telescope to look at the stars in Montana. It gives me more marketability and to leverage the view. So I think a lot of people think, oh, amenities, hot tub, barrel sauna, people are doing mini golfs and, pickleball courts and all that stuff. But how do you leverage that and tie that into what God built is super important. And I think people aren't thinking about that. The best in the business is Ashita Lalonde. And people think of her about interior design, but it's what she does outside. She's an architect by design, right? Or an architect by her previous job, her previous life. And so people think it's the interior design, and that's part of it, but it's what she does in the backyards of these places that are the true separators. And that's what I'm looking for, is what's the leverage point? What's the marketing? How do I create something that nobody else has? And if I walk through my entire portfolio with you, I will show. I've got another kind of average property. It's a 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath. And like the master suite, there's 2 master bedrooms, but one's in a basement. You got to walk through it to get to another bedroom. You got to walk through a bathroom to get to another. So it's wonky, right? It's like Willy Wonka down there. But there's no competition. And the 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath is only like 2,600 square feet. So like, I don't even have a dining table, Jamie. There's no room for a dining table. It's like the kitchen island and then some buffet tables up against the windows looking out at the view. But the view is of the village of Banner Elk. And I see Sugar Mountain, on the backside of Banner Elk. And most importantly, you can walk to the village. It's not even 400 yards, right? There's zero competition. The other properties you can walk to are garbage. Like literally, they need full guts renovation. So there's no competition. That's what I'm looking for. And it all starts with using your platform to find it. Like I do Zillow, AirDNA. But I do one thing that's different. Then I go to Super Property Grader and I do Performa last. So I think if you're one of those people that are listening and you get paralysis by analysis within your Performas, and like Jamie said, you find that market that you love and you see that AirDNA says it's going to do 95,000, you potentially can still do 110, 120, 130, but you've got to figure out the gaps that you can fill in that market first.
Yeah, and I suspect our data science team are going to love hearing this because we've got this project going on right now where we're going to start grading properties and have our own definition of the top like 10, 5, 1%.
Well, that would be Bill Faeth super properties at the top, right?
It's not going to. Well, we can talk about that, but essentially, like combined, like does it have a view? Does it have water access? What are the amenities that it have, and what is the impact of the amenities in those markets? And really help build to, because when I go to a market and want to find out like what are the outperforming properties, like yes, I could look at percentiles and revenues and find out what are the highest performing, but I want to like really know what are the properties with the most potential. What are the ones that are really outdoing it in terms of potential performance, and replicate that sort of thing. And maybe not even replicate in that market, but then go and take what people are doing really well in the Smokies and translate that to another market where, because it sounds like what you're saying is super properties isn't a definition. It is the view, it is the whole combination, and it's going to be different for every property out there of what has potential to be a super property. And then what do you do to make it be that super property? Because it's all about your vision, working with the right people, and turning it into a super property.
100%. I mean, we all know what it takes to compete in the backyards in Scottsdale, Arizona. Same thing that happens in Miami and kind of Fort Lauderdale down in that area. So instead of investing into something that's saturated and hard to compete in the Miami area or in the Aventura area, and is hard from a regulatory standpoint to find the pockets that you can go into, go do that in Port St. Lucie. Take the backyards that are there and take it to a different market that already has traffic. You might cap out at X dollars, right? And add that in and become the destination. So about 2 years ago, I took my mastermind to a lake property in Wisconsin, middle of nowhere. I had 2 twin brothers that own this property, Brad and Richard Arkell. And it's still to this day the best Airbnb short-term rental I've ever stayed in. I think everybody, I had 55 mastermind members that were there, would tell you the exact same thing. And they took a 5-bedroom house on Spooner Lake and turned it into, out of the cabin, and I don't even know how many bedrooms it is, but turned it into something that sleeps 80 people. But the amenities, the way that it was done, the way that the thought out process of where the outdoor pizza maker and the grill and the pool and the access to the dock and all these things were so well thought out, it gives them tremendous marketability. They're doing over $1 million a year on this property. I think they were into it for $3 or $3.5 million bucks, and just absolutely annihilating it. And it's the best large property that I've ever seen. But kind of back to what you said, remember, definition of a super property is that you outperform the marketplace. It has nothing to do with size.
That's awesome. And then we're getting at time, and I feel like we could talk for hours about this sort of stuff. But we're sitting here in early April. There's been a lot of market volatility. I feel like every time I look at my phone, I want to turn it off.
Don't look at
All,
don't look at the stock market, that's for sure.
yeah. And I was just at a hotel investment conference, and there was a lot of sort of negativity there on expectations around interest rates coming down. And how are you feeling today in terms of investment, in terms of and sort of investing in this sort of uncertain environment? There's sort of talk of recession. There's sort of a talk of pullback in travel. You've got the Delta CEO saying that they're seeing weakness on domestic travel. Does that change your perception of investing today? Or are you still
It does.
pedal to the metal?
It impacts it a lot because that means that a lot of people are going to be scared to pull the trigger. That means it's time for me to go. That's why I'm sitting on $1.8 million in cash ready to deploy. And I've been prepping. That's why I'm selling a $3.4 million property next week, which will add another $850,000 to my cash reserves. And I'm ready to go. Right? Because if I can underwrite an investment today or last year or in 2023 at the end of the year when rates were at like 8, 9 for DSCRs, if the deal works there, it's way better today when I can refinance that at 7, right? So if the deal works, it's time to go, right? There's also people are going to panic like they've done in the stock market over the last 2 weeks. There's people that are going to panic with their short-term rentals, with their primary residences. A lot of this stuff, that's an opportune time to be able to come in and make sound investments. So I said when at the 2023 conference, the STR Wealth Conference, that now is a prime time to be able to buy. And the best investments that I've made, Jamie, have been since then. Right? Because of that factor. Now, there's 2 things. I'm not talking about going in and doing 5 and 10% downs. I'm a 20% guy. This property, I'll probably put under contract today or tomorrow. I'm probably gonna have to be in the 30% range, and I'm fine with that. I know a lot of people are saying, well, Bill, you got more money than we do. Didn't start that way. But what I'm doing is I want to make sure I have an exit. And that's what a lot of people don't think about this. They just want to get in and they're not thinking about exits. And they do these 10% down second home loans, and then they do need to exit, and then they throw their cost seg recapture on top of it because they're selling it at year 3 versus year 5. Oh shit. And then they 1031 into it, and they're boxing themselves in. So we need to really understand that anytime we pull one of those levers, that needs to be factored into your exit strategy when you're doing your underwriting. So I look at 2 things, really 3 is going to be the cash flow, the appreciation, and the debt pay down, right? So that debt pay down, I'm already, 50% farther ahead than the average investor that's doing a 10% down when I have 20%. If you are underwater right now, and meaning like from a cash flow perspective, and you can exit your property, I don't care if you take a $10,000 or a $20,000 haircut. Everybody says, I'll lose money. Really what you're doing is you're accessing the equity that's in it to redeploy it. So if you can redeploy that and actually increase your cash flow, and maybe even get a little bit higher appreciation rate, then that's a really good thing. It's not a bad thing. But psychologically, we think, oh, I'm losing at this. And that's not the case. So I am bullish on buying now. I'm I just closed on a hotel in New Orleans. Took me and my partner a while to be able to find it, but man, it's a block from the French Quarter, right? You're familiar with the regulation for Airbnbs in New Orleans. It's nearly impossible,
And
right?
and it's getting worse by the day.
100%. And it's a hotel with an Airbnb permit, so we can do both. And we figured out a way, and this is kind of that uniqueness, right? To be able to put a $33,000 rooftop to see into the French Quarter that only like 3 other places have in all of downtown New Orleans. So I stay steadfast. Don't just jump in and buy something average. You've got to have something unique that creates insulation for your property.
Awesome. Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking and sort of and sharing your insights with us. And I hope to have you back in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. It's been amazing. I look forward to seeing you at the STR Wealth Conference.
Yeah. And if people want to reach out to you, want to find you, where's the best place to do it?
I mean, I'm everywhere on social. Bill Faeth, Faeth 73, Bill Faeth 73 on Instagram, or my Build Short-Term Rental Wealth Facebook group. Probably the easiest place.
I love that Facebook group. I get so much value out of there every day, learning so much from you and everyone else in that group. So highly suggest you join that group and join the conversation. So thanks,
Awesome.
Phil.
Thank you, Jamie.